sit at these circles of 30, 40 people, and, you know, maybe a quarter or more of them would either have this sour or this kind of stinky cheese type of flavor, and I kind of just feel like I've had my quota of most of those, especially the stinky one. But it's funny, it's really interesting as far as even that goes, that if you make it, somehow it like is much more palatable, you know, than like if you're introduced to it through some other means. And also something that's really good to notice that I've paid attention to is that if you age these things, even if there's an off flavor initially, then that might kind of like drop to the background over time. So just if you get into this and you happen to have something that is a little off-putting at first when you bottle it, then you know, letting it age longer is going to probably potentially be a helpful thing. And you know, most books are going to say wait 6 months to a year, and it's like before you even start. And like a lot of us in the brewing scene of Asheville, it's like lucky if we can get to a year before we finish. You know, like I always tend to leave at least a few things, you know, a few bottles for a year or two, just to kind of chart that progression of it. But yeah, I guess the answer to that thing is to brew in larger quantities if you want it to last longer, depending on your alcohol intake, because like one of these doesn't really, you know, go that far. It's definitely like an accessible and very easy way to start is just go to the co-op or local natural food store, get a gallon apple juice jug, you get the juice, you know, for beginners, and then you can you know, have this bottle for free, which the bottle would almost cost the same amount at a brew supply store without the juice in it. And then
Can I make a footnote? Just
Sure.
because I've really noticed the potential for mistakes in the apple juice that they sell at the co-ops nowadays. A lot of them are 3 quarts, but they look like gallon jugs. They're just a little bit smaller, and it's hard to notice, but you really have to read the fine print and make sure that it's the gallon one. And
Yeah.
I've just found it harder to find gallon jugs, and so I don't want
That's
anyone
true.
to make
Yeah.
sure you read the fine print and get a gallon.
Yeah, that's definitely very true. I'm not sure what that's all about either, because that hasn't really happened in the East. It's like something that I've just noticed around here. For some reason, they've moved to that. And yeah, and I mean, 3 quarts obviously would work just as well, but then you'd have even less of a finished product, you know, to finish up with. And typically, when you brew, you're going to end up with a little bit that you're not going to want to necessarily be drinking, called the trub at the bottom, so that thereby decreases the capacity to, you know, something on the order of 9 beer bottles and 4 wine bottles that you typically get out of a gallon container. So, you know, there's this whole story with honey, you know, and all different kinds of honey, and so I tend to go with McClary Farms here, which is a local purveyor of honey. And if you really get into this stuff, then it might be worth checking in with them about getting it in bulk, because I tend to buy it like at a gallon or 2-gallon type of level, and thereby save like about $18 a gallon off of the retail price, you know, if you were to go with them directly. And so they've got this blackberry stuff, which is really dark, and then we've got a clover one that is a good bit lighter, and then they've got a Nevada County Gold one that's made from different places around here locally. And I guess the point being that different honeys are going to have different characteristics in different regions of the country. You know, if you go farther south, you're going to see, you know, more star thistle honey, which is an exotic invasive plant, orange blossom honey, you know, alfalfa honey. Out in Appalachia we have sourwood honey, which I guess I just read was like the #1 mead at this international competition was with sourwood honey, which is this tree that only grows locally in the area of Appalachia. So you've got that one level of these different honeys that are going to bring their own different characteristics, and of course I'm sure a lot of y'all, if not all of you, are familiar with eating local honey to kind of acclimate to the local conditions, potentially help with allergies, homeopathy, and that type of thing. And so something that I've been kind of doing beyond that aspect of just honoring the locality of where I am and the beekeepers that are where I am, because the bees are having a really hard time, right? You know, a lot of them are dying right now, and there's kind of mysterious causes as to it. It's really good to kind of promote in your area the bees, especially if you're a gardener. You know, they say like 1 1 in every 3 bites that we eat comes from bee pollination, and so definitely need more beekeepers the better. And then of course you can save some money too by getting to know a local beekeeper. So there's lots of different levels that you're getting from that honey thing, and yeah, and then there's the story of the actual mead making, which I've kind of alluded to already, and I can talk a little bit more about as far as like certain ingredients, certain places, certain people, certain times a year. A big one, I think, for a lot of folks in Appalachia are the changes of the seasons, in particular the equinoxes and the solstices, and then even the spaces in between there seem to be really powerful times to do some brewing. And yeah, I guess I'll just kind of launch into the understanding of it, just to make sure that y'all that are here for a short time really get a sense of how you would go about, taking this process to fruition. So basically, you're going to have hot water in a vessel similar to this nature, but could be like a ceramic cylinder, kind of a crock, or they also make food-grade plastic containers that you can put this sort of stuff in. But basically, at this gallon scale that we have here, I would tend to add 3 cups of honey to the total amount of liquid here. And you can add up as much as 4 cups of honey. And basically what you're doing by varying that ratio is varying the amount of final alcohol potential, right? So, 3 cups would be somewhere on the order of 8 to 9%. 4 cups would be somewhere on the order of 12 to 13% potentially. It kind of will vary a little bit by the honey. And even, like, do you put the water up to the neck of it or down to the shoulder, that sort of thing. So, at its simplest, you would basically heat up some water, put in some honey, and then put it right in here. And then either, like I said, leave it exposed to the air for a few days and let it begin to ferment that way. Or you would, once it's cool, probably like beneath 100 degrees, you would put in something from one of these packets. Now, one of these packets is enough for 5 gallons, so technically if you were doing 1 gallon, then you could just put in a fifth of this. And up until recently, I would tend to just pour it into the container and then just let it rock, and I might even stir it, but just recently I've been kind of getting into more of kind of priming it, basically. And how many of y'all have made bread, like yeasted bread before? So right, and so basically, you have that little bit of sweet water that you pour, and it's the same exact species as the bread yeast. So in theory, you could use the stuff from the grocery store, but this has been selected to make good alcohol, and the bread one's been selected to make good bread. And what I found is actually you can get as much flavor in your finished product from the culture that you choose as you can from the specific plants or the different kind of honey that you use. So yeah, what I'm saying as far as the priming thing, very similar to bread, you would get, say, like a 1-cup mason jar and a little bit of your sweet liquid in there. Pour this in and let it sit there for like 10-15 minutes. And then pour it into your main container, and that kind of really kind of wakes it up and gets them going pretty strong, and then you'll get like a really good strong fermentation in the overall thing versus like, especially I think that's helpful in this time of year when it's kind of cool. If you're especially doing this outside of the kitchen or a warm space in your house, then it's good to kind of like kick it off really strong, or else it can kind of get stuck. The whole process of fermentation tends to shut down below 60 degrees. There are some cultures that can go down to 40-45 degrees. It's a different species. So most of what you're going to be using is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but there's a different species, Saccharomyces bayanus, which is something that can go to a lower temperature. And that one is this EC1118 culture from Lavlin. And I've got different brochures and stuff back there from the different companies. There's Red Star and Lavlin and White Labs, and so they've got kind of information on their different cultures that they use, and pretty much all those are available at the local brew supply store. Sierra Moonshine is the place that you can get like all the different equipment that you want, the different cultures, and that sort of thing. So we'll probably like wrap up at a certain point before 7 and just kind of have time for questions, mingling, and checking out further research. resources and that sort of thing.
Can I ask you a quick
Yes,
question?
please. Any questions?
Do you boil the honey in the water?
Okay, good question. So you can boil the honey in the water, and definitely a lot of the books that you read will say to actually do that. I would say that, pretty uniformly in the scene that we're part of in Asheville, we don't really do that, just because it does change the nature of the honey, and it's kind of, I guess, a relative thing, because anything above, say, 112, 114, all the enzymes are gone, all the vitamins are gone, because they're very volatile. But yeah, I guess basically the boiling part, what that is about typically is removing impurities, so little pieces of beeswax that are in there, other particulate matter, and I don't really think that our scene, we really see that as like a bad thing,
That would remove it anyway.
Well, yeah, because it kind of foams up to the top,
Oh, I see, so you can
and then
skim
you
it.
skim the foam,
Okay.
is the idea with that. And, I kind of joke around a little bit, sort of, in saying that, there's kind of different grades of production, so basically, like, I bring this stuff for presents or something, for my parents at home that tend to lead a little bit more of a clean-cut, mainstream life. And, then I would tend to want to have a clearer product, for them, because mead's already kind of funky enough to begin with, so to have, stuff floating in it, it's kind of like a little bit over the top, but if I was going to just bring it to a circle, of people that brew and they know about this process and they don't have those kind of issues, then it's just one less step, to not have to do that heating up and skimming or even racking like we were talking about earlier, which is another way that you can get rid of some of this stuff, is that you would start in one vessel and call that the primary, and then you would move it to a second vessel called the secondary, and there would be all this sediment on the bottom that stuff would kind of settle into, and then you would move the clear liquid onto the top, which we can talk about more. But to get back to your question, so what I would tend to do is to heat up everything to about 150, which basically sterilizes it. 150, 160 takes out any types of microbes that would be in there whatsoever, and then you basically have this blank canvas that you introduce your microbes of choice
So you
into.
heat that up in a pot and then you pour it into your pot.
Exactly, yeah. Now that being said, you can also just heat it up until it's warm enough for the honey to go in there, and then put it in there, and so that could even be below 114 if you want to keep the enzymes and that sort of thing, and that can work. And for that matter, in a rush, I've put the honey in the jar and put hot water on it and swirled it around, and most of the honey just sells to the bottom, and still made a perfectly good tasty mead.
In
with
your
that.
fermenter, you just do everything in there.
Exactly.
You have one
Yeah,
bottle.
in a pinch. Yeah, totally. I've done it. So, so it's pretty straightforward.
It doesn't change with brewing at all, just to keep your honey.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's something I'm playing with. I mean, for me, it's kind of I definitely want the finished product, because it takes more of a time investment than anything to do this, because it takes a few weeks to a month for it to be ready, and then, whenever you get around to bottling it. And so, yeah, I tend to trade off with leaving the honey raw, because I eat lots of honey in other ways too. And then lots of other good yummy raw foods, which I think is huge, to have the probiotic effect of fermentation, and raw foods in general is really important. But within my meads, I tend to want it to be really good tasting alcohol. And there is a chance that if you don't heat it up, that there can be other stuff that will kind of make it go off. And that's just more flavor wise than any kind of health issue or anything like that. So that's good to know too. It's kind of soothing that the most that's going to happen is you end up with vinegar basically, or something that has a little bit of an off flavor, but it's totally consumable. All right, so basically you've got this thing called the primary. Also, it could be called a carboy, especially if you had a 3-gallon, 4-gallon, 5-gallon version of this thing. You add your sweet liquid into that, and you know, that's like at its most base. Now, if you wanted to kind of get into the ranges of the stuff that we've been talking about, then basically what you would do is make a tea, you know, of your choosing, and then add the honey in after that, and then kind of just basically move forward from there. Now, you might ask, and we've definitely experimented, it's like something that I've gotten to is to make the tea as strong as I want it, you know, maybe even overnight if I really want it to have that strong flavor, but then strain it before like I actually start the fermenting process, versus, you know, you definitely could have plant material in here as well, and that's its own type of thing that I think ranges between what type of plant material it is. Like, I definitely wouldn't recommend having leafy plant material in here, because that does tend to also, once again, seem to make it go off oftentimes in these like not the best flavors, especially in the interface that happens as the plants tend to rise to the top if it's a leafy type of thing. But if it's like a root, for instance, like ginseng or osha or some of these powerful medicinals, like then I might put those in there because they're woody, they're dry, and it tends to take a while to extract their flavor anyway. And then similarly with fruits, I'll often put fruits into that primary for a good while, a couple few weeks, maybe even a month, you know, blueberries, cherries, strawberries, that sort of thing. When I do that though, I tend to put it in an open container, like one of those plastic food grade buckets, because it's a little bit easier to clean out if you have all that plant material in there than trying to get it out of here.
What if I have just a big wide mouth gallon jar?
Sure. You can definitely do that. The big thing with once the fermentation process has happened and started to move forward and there's alcohol in there, is that you really don't want to be exposed to air, because there's a culture of bacteria called Acetobacter that can get in there, and it eats alcohol and turns it to vinegar. So if you have a wide mouth jar, you need to figure out some way that you could keep that from happening. How you would do it in something like this is that you would have this little handy dandy thing called an airlock here, where you put water in there and then put this on here, and that allows the CO2, which is the other byproduct besides alcohol from this process, to escape, but it doesn't let air get in there. So you can do it like this with here with apple juice jar with this cap, or with those wide mouth fermenting buckets I was talking about. They have a lid, and then you just put this thing straight into a little hole within that lid. So I mean, you could in theory like maybe drill out like a mason jar lid, you know, so that it's about the same size as this, and put that on top of it. I've never done that, but no reason why that wouldn't work, you know. And then the only thing though that I would really encourage is like 1 gallon is like the smallest amount you really kind of want to mess with to be like really have it feel worth your while. And I've definitely been moving more towards 3 or 5 gallons at a time, because it just tends to go fast, you know, even if you don't drink
Yeah,
much, like, which I don't tend to drink that much, but I love to like share it with people and bring it to events, potlucks, birthdays, and that sort of thing. So that might be another reason to just go with a bigger container. But they definitely, you can find, like especially at thrift stores and whatever, big glass containers with bigger mouths as well. That's of interest. I definitely have a couple of those, because I'm trying to get away from plastic myself, but I definitely still use it some. So, okay, so you basically have this, you put your sweet liquid in, whether it's just honey and water, or whether it's tea with whatever different kinds of plants that you want in there, and then basically it's going to need like a few weeks, like a month or so to actually convert that sweet liquid into alcohol. There's a way when you're first doing it that you can tell how much alcohol that is by using this little thing called a hydrometer here. So this is like about a $6 investment that you basically put some of your sweet liquid in at the initial phase of starting your brewing, and then you drop this into that sweet liquid, and depending on where it falls, there's these gradations, little lines, and you know, it starts with 0 and goes down to 16, so that's 0 to 16% alcohol. So if it's up high in the liquid, then that means there's a larger capacity of alcohol. and that's directly related to how much sweetness you've added. And it's kind of a two measurement thing, so you measure it initially when you first start the process and see where it's like 16 or 10 or 8 or whatever that might be, depending on how much honey you added, and then you measure it again at the finish of the process, and most people want it to sink all the way to 0, which means that you made the total amount of alcohol that was possible. And then it also means that your finished product is going to be really relatively dry, versus if there was any measurement above 0, that means that there's still some sweetness in there. And you know, typically you don't want to be over like 1 or 2% unless you want like something that's like really desserty. So maybe on
Is
that
it-
note, yeah, I'm
Does
listening.
it matter what order you put the tea and the